Hey, this module is going to focus on going into a project a little more in depth. And I'm going to touch on the topics that I covered in a series of blog posts that went Monday through Friday on starting a project, how I set it up, how the templates work, how I use it, and I cover a little bit about Markdown. So let's just do it. So here's a sample vault that is set up with the two key plugins you need to make all of this work. So if you click on the little gear icon, you're going to be able to look at community plugins, and you're going to see I have DataView and I have Templater installed. They are relatively easy to find. You could tell DataView has 1.6 million installs, Templater 1.1 million, super popular plugins. They're very robust. And just a quick note on Templater, when you set it up, you're going to want to, I wanted to create a folder to put my specific Templater plugins in. And pretty much everything else is, left alone. Uh, and so what we're looking at is today's note. This happened to be the day I'm recording this. And this is the default when it opens up. But let's start with a project. So what do? I've got a book launch coming up. So I'm going to create a folder um, for that project in my projects folder. Sounds pretty straightforward. I always put the word project in front of it so that if I archive something, it's easier to find in the archives because I don't replicate the project areas, resources, folder structure in the archives. I just, when I'm done, throw it in the archives. It's all searchable. You can find it. But this just makes it a little easier to find. Once you've created that folder, we're not going to need a home node. So I put an underscore, you could put a zero, just something to make sure this is the first file in the folder directory. It always sorts first. And so I tend to flip it around and say book, launch, project, plan. And now comes the magic of if I run Templater, I have DB project plan template. Hit return, boom. I get this document is now formatted with a bunch of properties at the top. One of these happens to be an alias. So whenever I'm working with links to this file, I get a nice pretty alias. I don't have to deal with the underscore. That goes away. And that same methodology takes care of my Zettelkasten numbers. One of these big, long, unique IDs at the front of files to make sure that they're always unique, even if they have the same title, like chapter one or part one. Every file is unique. And the alias just makes them very readable. I'm the author. When I created it, I have a little script, or I can manually say when I've updated a file. And then I put in a couple of tags. And these are mostly useful for DataView scripts. I rarely pull up tags and use them to find files. And then comments. Comments, I'll explain how and show you in a second how that's useful. But that's a fairly standard header for me. This is called metadata. This is data that is not in the file, it's data about the file. Then the script cleaned up my title. And then now I have a format of how I think about projects. And so this works for me. You could do almost anything you want in here. But what I tend to do is think really quick executive summary. What is this and why am I doing it? And so I'll replace this little placeholder text and say something like, completed my book, work at play, and now I need to start working on promoting it. Pretty straightforward. Now, what's the goal? A project without a goal is a hobby. A goal without a project is a wish. So what I'm trying to do is I can either type it in here, or you can even, if you want to do so, create a bigger goal that projects link to. And that's a thing you could do. But the simplest thing is just, man, what's the goal? And a goal is to reach bestseller status in at least one category on Amazon and accumulate 55-star reviews. Seems like a fairly reasonable goal. What does done look like? Well, a screenshot bestseller and 50 plus 5-star reviews. Oop, I misspelled that. Let's fix it. Now, what are these other things? So the reason I do this is that what I've really created is a workspace for me. I've created a container for information, something to bind everything together. So branches often end up being where I start putting new notes. I'm going to interview 2 or 3 different people. I'm going to use my network to say, who do you know? Fortunately, I know people that have launched books. I'm like, who did you work with? How did you do it? So I'll gather a lot of information to understand how to best go about it. I use sort of a engineering problem solving process, and that process starts with research. What do I know? Who do I want to talk to? What am I trying to find out? And so this branches section is where I start capturing all of my subnotes and all of the thought trains that I'll create, or the threads that I'll create as I do my homework and my research. And so the project becomes sort of this kitchen, if you will, where I gather all the ingredients I'm going to use to achieve my book launch. Resources, a little similar to branches, but resources might be web links. So things I want like right at the top, like I might put the link to log into Kindle Direct Publishing here. I could put a link to, let's say, an online course I'm taking relative to this. So the idea is the resources are, maybe it's links to a Google Doc, or just all of those little bits of bookmarks and places that are related to this project, put them here. And now the plan, this isn't your classic project management type thing. This is more an outline of steps that I might be taking. And the often what will happen is I'll brainstorm a series of steps in a 3x3. Like, what do the outcomes look like? And what are 3 things that have to happen? This is really similar to objectives and key results, is you're just trying to create and brainstorm a quick framework for how you see this project rolling out. And then you can use that information to create in a much more robust application like Asana or Monday.com, or even a fun program like Remember the Milk or ClickUp, a more robust project plan. And for all of those web-based ones, I'll paste a link to the project plan in this document as well. And then the journal is kind of a marker to myself where I will put in a link to the day that I'm making the journal entry. So that would be 2024. And you can see the dates start popping up. So let's put today in there. Started launch project research. And this is sort of a coding programming thing, but this happens in many documents, is that when you make a significant update, you leave yourself a note. What were you doing? Why were you doing it? What were you going to do next? That's also called a Hemingway bridge. So it makes it pretty straightforward to go ahead and just leave yourself little footnotes of what you were doing. Now let's get down to the bottom here, and I will come back to this. This block allows me to have a much more functional file list of the kind of files that I expect, that are in this folder. So this is where the comments really comes to play. I'll talk more about how all this works in a second, but that weird little language there, I set a placeholder so that it looks like SQL, but it's actually DQL, or data view query language. And so this particular script is written to create a list of the files that are already in your folder, but in a much more readable format. So we now have this book project. That's how it starts. Pretty straightforward and simple. Now let's take a look at the template I used to create it. Let me explain how this works. So we dive into this file. What I want to show, let's take a look at, we're going to pop into the editor and we're going to switch to source view. Right here is properties and document. We can go back and take a look at what this used to look like before Obsidian changed it. So, and you can even notice that this bit of text is, even in source view, is all monospaced. So it's acting like code. It has a special significance in a file. It's called front matter. And this is where you store fields or information about your file. And so using Templater, I do a couple things. I set up my aliases and I use this little bit of script here, tp.file.title.slice1, to grab everything after that first underscore and then stick it in the alias. So this is how I get rid of the underscore. And I pre-populate the alias field with that title name. My name's already loaded, but I can also get the date I created the file preloaded and stick it in the field. And all these expansions happen as soon as you expand the file. Notice this exact same script gives me my level 1 header. And so what Templater is as a template tool, it will expand blocks of text. And what makes it super powerful is not only does it provide its own functions, it also supports JavaScript. So if you know how to code in JavaScript, you can do some really, really powerful things when you expand a template into a text file. And finally, near the end, you can see I've already inserted, it's nothing special, but the data view template. So when I create a new project, Templater expands, replaces all this, codey stuff with the text I want to see. And so what you'll get is a project that looks like this. Everything's filled in, everything's readable, it makes sense, and you're ready to go. So it is a huge quality of life improvement. And I keep my templates in a Templater directory. Now, let's go back into turn the editor from source into visible. And now properties look pretty. They've got little icons next to them, and they have special ways you interact with them, and it's easy to collapse them and get them out of your way. So they act like they're part of the application, but they're still really just text in your text file on your hard drive. Now, when I launch into a project, the way I work with a project is I do a ton of research. And so one of the first things that I might do is have an interview with somebody. So let's take a look at Amber Vilhauer interview notes. It is just as common for me when I'm making a new project to do all this in a daily note and then later copy the daily note information and stick it in a new note. So when I jump into this, by clicking that link, I get a brand new note. And it looks like I've got a feature here because that note should have showed up in the Book Launch project and it didn't. So I'm going to have to drag that back up here. And I think there's a setting I'm going to have to find that is going to show me that when I make a new note, I want it to be in the folder where I click the link. So let's take a look. So I click on the gear, we go to files and links, and number one, I want to turn this on, automatically update internal links. This is super important because you will end up renaming files and you'll want everything that's already linked to that file to automatically be updated. And here's where kind of quote went wrong is I want to make new notes in the same folder as the current file, not the base of the vault. And so we're going to now accept that, close it. And now if I were to go back and say, oh, let's create a note with Robbie Samuels, interview notes. Okay, let's make sure that that did what I thought it did. Click, there, Robbie shows up in the folder. Now, it is what I haven't loaded in here, because it is really complicated, and I'll deal with it in the future, is my default note template. But the default note template is pretty straightforward. You can still put in aliases. You can still add, who's the author? It's me. When did I create it? If you click on the little thing here, you could do all this by hand. It just ends up being somewhat tedious. Um, Amber interview. Okay. Now, one of the things that I frequently like to do is have sort of a break notes into little chains. So it's like the previous note, the next note. And so there's sort of the idea of like one idea per note. You don't have to do it, but that's how I do it. And one of the things I didn't comment on when I had the properties as comments is um, in Amber specializes in personal branding, but she does a lot of other services as well. But I'm going to put a comment in there because what will happen is when I come back and look at book project plan, let's take a look at this. Change it to data view. Suddenly, I now have clean notes with little comments next to them. But let's go a level deeper. Remember, I just said, oh, automatically update my links. Well, let's say I want to make, turn this into a Zettelkasten style note. In other words, there's a date formatted number at the beginning of the file to force it to be unique. Because it turns out I've interviewed Amber more than once. So it's very possible I could have this exact file name, Amber Villauer interview notes, from different things. She was a speaker at our EO chapter, but she's also helps with book launches. So using this unique note will make this file completely unique. And now up in the corner, it said, oh, we've updated one link. Let's go figure out where that link was updated. And sure enough, you see in the branches, that was updated. Well, that's a little bit ugly to read. So you can put a vertical bar next to that, and it didn't find the aliases. It should have found Amber notes. You could just type text and it collapses it. Makes it really much easier to read. But clicking on that, because there was no alias, Amber Villauer interview notes, that's why it was empty. Normally the my template would expand that for me. I forgot to put it in by hand. So now if we go back to book launch, as soon as you type the vertical bar, it will give you the list of aliases that you have to choose from. And again, it makes it much cleaner and simpler. And look down here. It is using not the file name for this file list, but it's using the alias so that these names are much more readable. Because if you look up in the corner now, you'll see there's this big, long, ugly number first. I get it. It seems like a lot of, tedious work. You're like, why are you doing all that? Because my note base has 7,000 files in it. When you start using something like this for years, it's shocking how often a name can come up and be reusable and create a conflict. And it's just a habit I picked up that when I started first working with Zettelkasten, that always give a note a unique ID, a Zettelkasten number. And maybe it's something you don't need, but it really, if you get in the habit and you build in a system to make it work for you, then I never have to worry about notes stepping on each other. I never have to worry about notes colliding. And at the same time, then it's like everything's very readable. So you don't need to do that. I would say start simple, just like what I did before. Just put in Robbie Samuel's interview notes and then fill it out. And when you discover that, boy, there's a template of a note that you're doing the same things over and over again, make a template out of it. So it's easy to expand and it's easy to use. Well, let's go back and let's take a look at this data view script. So we're going to step into it. And what it does is it's going to create a table without a default ID. I want to make it linked, and I'm going to link it to its alias, and I'm going to call it the note, and then I want to see the description. And this is where the magic happens. It says where the file path matches this file's folder. And the name is not the same because I don't need to list this file in its own file list. And then we just sort by the alias name in an ascending way. And that gives us this cool little table that is not only easier to read, but it'll also leave me a specific comment. Now, there's one other thing that was in the articles that I didn't mention yet here. When I interview somebody or I meet somebody, one of the things that I'll often use is um, what I call a people card. So I'll put their name in brackets, and then when I click on their name, I will use a people card. And what a people card is, it's a note for a person. So you can think of it as a super lightweight CRM, but it's more than that. It can contain preferences. It can contain useful information. Kids' birth, like the Harvey Mackay 66. Throw it in here. And I really got this idea from a friend of mine, Chris Roth, that has notes in Evernote on all of his friends. So if he's going into town, he's going to visit people, he can easily pull up, oh, who do I know in New York? And by New York, he can pull everybody he knows, and he can find out who likes to go to the theater, who likes to go to the Yankees game, who wants to see the Knicks. He'll find out, like, it's easy for him to grab information about the people he knows and show up for them the way that they want to be shown up for, and help, and pass time with them in ways that they find enjoyable. And I love that idea. And so the other thing that's great about once you start having people cards and start linking your notes to people, you can use the backlink property to see how you know them and what you're involved in and what else you've done with them. What other projects do they have? How have you worked with them in the past? Like, what else are they connected to? So the people card gives you another way of adding a little more depth of information that in time can become really, really valuable. So summing this all up, what you got is I started a folder, I created a project plan, I have a template for that project plan that pre-populates a lot of information for me, saves me a lot of typing. And then once I get started, I start creating branches to contain all my notes and information and interviews. And this becomes the place where, like my kitchen, I'm pulling ingredients out and I'm setting them up because I'm going to do my cooking here. And so everything I need to know about this project. What it allows me to do is if I have to walk away from it for a few days, I can easily come back and pick up where I left off. And I'm sure there's a dozen ways you can improve this yourself once you get going with it. But the last thing that was in my article this week, and if it seems a bit weird to you, I do want to point it out. Obsidian works with Markdown documents. What is Markdown? Markdown is a special kind of text formatting where you use codes. Let's create a simple branch. What is Markdown? Put 2 squares for a wiki link style thing. When I click on it, that will create a new file. And what it does is it's designed to be super easy to convert to HTML. So it was written with the intention of making it really easy for you to put your content on the web. And they did this because if you've ever copied and pasted out of Word or Google Docs or Apple Pages, there's always some messed up file format, and you spend more time fighting with file formatting, as much time with that as what you spend actually writing the piece. You just want to put it up there. And a lot of blog hosting software now, even Google Docs now supports Markdown. And the whole idea is that it's supposed to be really simple. 2 hashes give you set the level of the heading, so that's a level 2. If I put 3 in, I get a level 3 heading. And what they're really trying to do is not control presentation, but capture author intent. If I want to emphasize a word, making it italics, I can put a single underscore in front of it. I misspelled that. So much for me. You can do the same thing with bold, but 2 stars. You can do the same with bold. And you can take it a step further. I love lists. If you put a hyphen and hit space, you're going to get a bullet list. A, item B, item C. But if you want an ordered list, let's say you're doing a recipe or a process, that has to be done in a specific order, you can use numbered list. Type a number, the period, hit space, and now it's going to begin to um, automatically number the list for you. And there's a lot more it can do, but it's really trying to capture how you're trying to express the information. What font color, how it's laid out. That's up to the web application. But the idea is to make it really easy without taking your hands off the keyboard to be able to put structure and intent around your content and information. There is a great help if you go to the official website. They will absolutely give you look for Markdown and Obsidian flavored Markdown, and boom, they just give you like a whole bunch of information on who created it, how it works. And one of my favorite things about Obsidian, I do this all the time. It is kind of unique to them, is I can create callouts. And so I can put little asides in my notes, and I love those things. So for me, the Markdown ends up being super portable, and I don't get stuck with a proprietary system like Word or Google Docs or Pages. And in fact, almost all of my writing starts in Obsidian, and then I can use a plugin to export it as a Word doc, as a PDF doc, as an HTML file, as a rich text file. Like I can send it wherever I want. And that has worked really well for me. And there's still a ton of applications that work great with Markdown. They'll just straight up paste the Markdown into the editor and you're off and running. It's awesome. So that's kind of a summary of what I wrote about this week, of how I work with projects. And I hope you find that useful.